Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Metashevsky. I'm the lobbyist for AIA Maryland, and I wanted to share some thoughts about what we what we can expect with a new legislature coming, and some of the people that will be returning who were very, very instrumental in helping us with our climate change bills. And just wanted to do that because Chris Parts is going to give you the legislative part of it, but it's important to understand where we are in the process. So for the next 2 or 3 minutes, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. We need to pay attention in 2023, which will be the next session, to the race for governor. It's reasonable to expect right now that we're probably going to have a Democratic victory with either Peter Franchot or Wes Morris. They're very, very well heeled. They're way out front in all the polls. But we need to look at the governor's race. We need to look at the comptroller's race. Brooke Learman and Barry Glassman. One's an R. Brooke is the D, and Barry Glassman is an R. He is the current county executive for Harford County, and Brooke is a delegate from Baltimore City, and she's running for comptroller. And there's a new treasurer. He's not up for election by the public. The legislature elects him. But the reason I would like people to focus on is the governor, the comptroller, and the treasurer vote on every contract awarded in the state over $200,000. And that's a very, very important thing to architecture in Maryland. They make up the State Board of Public Works. But as importantly, there's going to be stability after this election. There's a very stable, and I mean politically stable, president of the Senate in Bill Ferguson. I expect him to be reelected to the Senate. He has no opposition at home in his district for reelection. And House Speaker Adrienne Jones, she's very stable. There are 11 Democratic opponents in her district, but there are only going to be 3 that will be elected, and she is well-heeled as far as her financing is concerned and as far as her campaign apparatus. So we're going to be losing Senator Dolores Kelly. She's the chair of finance. She's retiring, but she's been a good mentor to her committee, and there's a great bench on her committee for anybody that succeeds her. We're going to lose a good vote in Senator Ed Riley. He's a Republican who has helped us. He's from Anne Arundel County. He's not running for reelection. But there's extremely good news in the Baltimore metropolitan area and surrounding areas. Corey McCray, a senator from Baltimore City, very qualified. He's coming back. Jill Carter will be back. Antonio Hayes. These are 3 senators from Baltimore City that have literally no opposition. We can expect them to come back, and they've been big help to us over the years. Chris West, a Republican from Baltimore County, minimal opposition. We expect him to be back, along with Mary Beth Carrozza, who is on our committee of EHEA, which is Environmental Health and Education Affairs. We expect her to be back. She's been very supportive of us. Johnny Moutz, he's running for Senate against Addie Eckert. Either one of those 2 have been a good vote for us, and we win either way. Steve Hershey, a Republican from the Eastern Shore. He has a couple of opponents, but he should win. There's a very good chance we can gain a big supporter in Harford County. A lady who was in the House of Delegates years ago, Mary Delaney James. She has a chance to take that seat and return it to the Democrats. Maggie McIntosh, good supporter of ours, and Shane Pendergrass. Both women are retiring, but there are many veteran legislators who are our supporters, who are in line, that will take their place. Coming back, and this is the biggest one, is Senator Pinsky. He's the chair of our committee, where all of our legislation, pretty much about 95% of our legislation goes. And Delegate Barve will be back. He's the chair of the Environmental and Transportation Committee. But most encouraging, and I want to stress this, is the next class of legislative leaders is younger, it is more diverse, it's more progressive, and it's energetic. So I I can't remember a more opportune time where legislative profiles appear as favorably to our agenda as the class of 2023. And that doesn't mean that we should sit back and take a break. This is the time for us to ramp up our efforts. So I invite everybody out there who is inclined to join us in Annapolis, join us online, whether they're Zoom meetings or Google meetings, join us by phone. The message to remember here is there will be new members in the House and the Senate. Many will certainly have our opinions, and that's where our activism enters, and they're going to have their own opinions. So it's going to be important for us to encounter them, inform them, and educate them. So that's my take on the legislature. I'm excited about it. I'm enthused about it. I think we're going to have a very impressive group that we can work for on our environmental issues.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Sure.
Lisa, why don't we go? So
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. I should have done a brief intro. This is a COAT. We kind of got distracted there. This is a COAT program. We should each do a quick intro, and we will do video magic to move that back up to the beginning.
Okay.
So Joe, do you want to go first? Quick intro.
Yeah, Joe Metashevsky. I'm the lobbyist for AIA Maryland, former member of the legislature. I served in the House and Senate, ran for governor in 1994, ran second to Paris Glendenning, and I have been lobbying. I'm with Old Line Government Affairs, and I represent AIA before the House and Senate and the executive department in the state.
And Ben Roush, co-chair of the AIA Baltimore COAT and member of Chris's committee for AIA Maryland Legislative Affairs.
And Chris Parts, Hord Copeland Mock, and on the AIA, a director on AIA Maryland for AIA Baltimore. And I help to coordinate the legislative efforts for AIA Maryland.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Ferretto. I also am an architect at Hord Copeland Mock and the sustainability director and a Baltimore City Sustainability Commissioner. And I volunteer to help Chris and Ben and others on this call with legislative activities.
So Ben, shall I go ahead then?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Well, thanks all for joining us. Just trying to give you a little bit of insight as to what we've seen over the past session and things that we hope to work on here in the future. So just as statistics, 1,011 Senate bills and 1,487 House bills in this past session. I don't know how many we tracked, but it was a lot of them. AIA Maryland, generally, we have a little spreadsheet on our website that Sandy posts every week, and we would have a call during the session once a week, Mondays at noon, to talk through bills that we are acting on, and basically the link or the page that Sandy would post had live links to the legislation and a brief summary and kind of a brief bit of information on board actions there, and it was just organized numerically. So go ahead. So trying to capture bills that we have tracked in ways that I think trying to capture just in loose categories. And I guess one of the other things that wanted to share is that there were a lot of activities that were enabled because the state has had a big influx of funds. So there have been federal funds that have come in to the state. So this has enabled kind of some more liberal releasing of the purse strings for some activities to happen here. So first, kind of loosely grabbing transportation category, along with a lot of the climate action influences basically the conversion of state buses to zero emission vehicles, an intent to really work on the state's entire fleet. And the buses is an important component of that. One of the big pushbacks on that has been workforce training and putting folks out of jobs. So one of the big provisions of that bill is providing workforce training to enable folks to learn how to maintain and work on electric buses. Part of the transportation also is kind of looking at some bigger picture issues. So like House Bill 19, pedestrian safety plans. I think this was maybe the third year for that in the legislative session. And it's basically, I think, as major additions or new schools are being constructed, pedestrian safety plans for safe paths to school are now required. And House Bill 73, the Complete Streets Bill, is basically a funding in Baltimore City that takes money from your photo traffic violations and feeds it back to enhancing street and sidewalk, or basically pedestrian bicycle safety signage and other components to make our streets safer for folks to travel on the streets. Additionally, kind of along those same lines, there was a state highway pedestrian bicyclist fatality review. So anytime that there is a fatality, they do kind of an assessment as a result of this bill to understand what may have been the cause of that, and if there's other infrastructure that should be corrected to try to help address some of those issues. The 632 is taking a look at the transit again, and I think that as Joe had mentioned, as we take a look at a new governor looking at public transportation over highway widening, might have a new bend here as under a new administration. So we're hoping to see some more action on that. And then lastly, I think House Bill 696, the school bus pilot program, and I think that's this is through utility incentives, focusing on looking at a pilot program. I can't remember how many buses that they're looking at, but part of the issue with that is establishing the infrastructure to enable that to happen, and that's a piece of that bill there. Then next, Lisa. And I don't know, I guess, are we, Ben, are we just doing questions then at the end, or if folks see things, they can put it in the chat and you can interrupt then, if that's, all right, I'm fine either way, however you'd like to do that.
Yeah, we are now no longer on a webinar, so people can unmute themselves and ask questions if you've got it. It can be pretty informal with a group this size, or you can put it in the chat if you don't want to interrupt, and we'll monitor that as we go.
Right.
And to the buses, it is utility funds, and it's a weird public-private partnership allowable. It's quite interesting if you get into the details.
Great. And this is another piece, the safe product and custody, I think is really something that we're seeing, and I expect to see a lot more of this. This is really looking at a lot of the product chain of custody issues, taking a look at what has historically been potentially harmful components of products, and looking at how to address those and make those kind of safer, both for removal and understanding how to handle those. So for instance, the paint stewardship bill, that was basically returning a bill that required facilities that distribute paint to receive unused paint to capture that and collect that and bring that back. So it did pass the House, but not the Senate, and I expect that will be something that will be back I think that there are a few states that have that implemented now, and I don't recall which states do. House Bill 133, the coal tar sealant products, and this is, taking a look at, this actually did pass, and this is used for limited, components of, exterior waterproofing and such, and limiting or eliminating the ability to sell that. School construction design contracts. This is just basically including plans for waste disposal and school design. So making sure that adequate space is planned for collecting waste, collecting recycling, and disposal of materials there on site. One of the other things I think that actually I guess is the two down is the public school grant program looking at composting for school waste. So schools can request a grant to enable them to compost on the school site. So that's another component of waste infrastructure, understanding the space it takes to collect that and making sure that that works, in terms of school design and kind of learning from that. So there are some jurisdictions, and essentially that will be on any school in the state, I think, can apply for that grant to enable them to do that. The Senate Bill 90, I think, was a supplemental environmental project database. So this is basically if someone had been tracked for basically polluting, they can do an environmental project in lieu of simply paying a fee for settlement. So this is a means of tracking that and identifying that project. And then lastly, I think that this did not get through, but part of the climate change bill, and this is something I think that we've seen in a number of other states, is green concrete, basically looking at concrete options that lower the carbon impact of concrete. And I think, was that last year, I believe that was tried in the roadways, state roadways, where they're using concrete in roadways. So I think that's something, again, that we will see coming back. Next is historic revitalization. This is definitely a big piece of having funds available. So this year, the historic tax credit funding, we have been lobbying this for years. And just to give you kind of a perspective, I think Maryland in the past years had, I believe, $9 million of tax credit funding that went to projects. 2 years ago, West Virginia raised their volume to $30 million, and the state of Virginia has been funding that over $100 million for a number of years. So we've been lobbying hard to get this through. So this year, and I think for the next 5 years, I believe, it's raising from $9 to $22 million, and it's increasing some caps, like a per project cap up to $5 million. And I think also raising some components of the small commercial tax credit. And kind of parallel to this is the Maryland Great Outdoors Act that basically is investing. I think our state parks have seen a huge increase in use over the COVID. So I think that rightfully there's a huge investment in preservation that's going there and maintenance of the park system. So I think that's a great use of federal money. Then next, I think energy, we wanted to talk about briefly. There have been a lot of dialogue in the past session about kind of big, kind of grid-focused energy, but then also taking a look at bringing some of that down to to smaller scales, and also enhancing energy opportunities for low to moderate income communities. So and incentivizing programs so that if folks simply don't have the funds to convert to a non-carbon based fuel, that they will not end up paying exorbitant rates because they can't switch their systems. The Resiliency Hub Grant program, I think, is looking at basically, identifying finds that will help to create, some of the underserved communities. The House Bill 79 solar program basically provides, I think, a 50%, or it provides a tax credit that if 50% or more of a community solar program serves low and moderate customers, and that's at 20% below market rate for the solar rates. So, there has been a real focus on trying to make that, renewable energy affordable to underserved communities. And then additionally, I think that they allowed a higher capacity on community solar programs, bumping from 2 to 5 megawatts. And then the school solar construction, I think currently the legislation requires solar panels to be studied on school construction and the design development stages. And I think what we often find is that those simply, that there's kind of a very superficial study that often simply gets dismissed. But this bill basically requires providing a reason why you're not using that if there are if that's assessed and not considered then. Resilience, I think this is also a piece that we've seen a number of years of legislation trying to move some issues forward. Maryland, I think, is unique with our Chesapeake Bay. We have, was it 3,190 miles of coastline, which is certainly significant for a state of our size. So there are a number of programs like the Resilient Revolving Loan Fund that's looking basically at modifications to properties to offer low interest loans to help reduce stormwater and other erosion issues. The Office of Resilience, often when we're taking a look at environmental issues, those will be addressed through many different state agencies. So the Office of Resilience is basically identifying a chief resilience officer that coordinates across many different jurisdictions to try to have a more coordinated, focused effort on that. And then Senate Bill 14, the Sustainable Maryland Program, is basically focused on funds for education in underserved communities to build awareness of the hazards of environmental disasters as a result of climate change, and identifying means to help in those communities to work with folks. Now I think Lisa's going to pick it up.
Thanks, Chris. So thank you. I'm happy to be here today. I'm glad we have a small group. We can maybe get into some conversation at the end. And I'm sure you guys have all heard about Climate Solutions Now Act. This year it was called the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022, similar to Climate Solutions Now Act of 2021. This year it did pass, and it's really exciting. It's really just a huge comprehensive climate bill. Here's a link. It's over 100 pages of great reading. It covers everything from environmental justice to transportation to agriculture to buildings. So I'm just going to focus on the buildings section for my portion of this presentation. There's 3 main aspects in that section: greenhouse gas emission reduction goal, what we call BEPS, Building Energy Performance Standards, and benchmarking, and then the almost but not quite electrification of buildings. That did not pass. So greenhouse gas emissions, Maryland already had a goal of a 40% reduction by 2030. That was updated to a 60% reduction by 2030, and then somewhere in the last couple of days it switched to 2031. That's fine, close enough. We also added this huge goal of the net zero by 2045. And if you're wondering how that aligns with Baltimore City and the federal government, everyone has that net zero by 2045. That's great. But you can see that 60% reduction. Maryland has 2030, Baltimore City has 60% by 2030, federal government has 50% by 2032. So there's always sort of that intermediate step. This is an AIA presentation. You guys all have seen this chart on the right, the built environment is about 50% of all of the global carbon emissions, and all of the other things in this Climate Solutions Now Act is really kind of trying to reduce the emissions of all of these aspects. So now we'll jump into building energy performance standards. This will affect every covered building in the state of Maryland that's over 35,000 square feet. You can exclude parking structures from that number. This is commercial, multifamily, residential, even state-owned buildings, except for schools, historic buildings, manufacturing, agriculture. There's targets here. So there's overall targets, a 20% reduction by 2030 and net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. These targets are based, if you're not familiar with BEPS, you're comparing your building to other average buildings of similar construction of some baseline year, and that is listed as 2025. Benchmarking is also in the climate bill. You cannot do a BEPS program without benchmarking, right? Because you need to have the baseline to start with. It says that this is going to start in 2025. So you can see this might be a conflict. However, maybe we can read this as you're reporting your emissions from the prior year, since you have to begin the program in 2025. The entire program for Maryland is not set up. That's going to be the responsibility of the I think it's the Maryland Department of Energy. So hopefully all these things will be worked out when they write the program. At the very last minute, they crossed out to use an Energy Star portfolio manager tool or equivalent. So again, that has to be figured out when they write the program. And there's also this multifamily residential energy efficiency grant that is available to help multifamily residential buildings meet their targets. So you can get an energy efficiency grant as long as you're not putting in new or upgrading existing equipment using fossil fuels. School construction, this actually does look like, this is what I looked like as a child, but that is not. They struck out this one net zero school in each district by 2033. This is not a hard thing, right? It's 2022. One net zero school in the next 11 years. There was also exceptions that the Interagency for School Construction, the IAC, can waive requirements. For some reason, anything with zero energy, anything was struck out of the bill. They did leave this funding mechanism in, which I'm really excited about. They will increase the state funding by 5% if the school can get to net zero. I really like that one.
And that's particularly, I think, relevant to that other bill that passed, that if you're doing the justifying why you're not pursuing solar collection on school rooftops, that hopefully would eliminate that that justification if folks are using costs as a justification there.
All of the things on this slide were things that were struck out. I think they're really important to just mention, though, because I think they're going to be coming back soon. The very big one is electrification. There was a whole section that water and space heating for new buildings were not allowed to use fossil fuels. Out. Electric ready standards. This section was a little bit vague. We tried to insert an amendment to try to clarify that, and then also add in solar roof set aside and buildings being solar ready. That did not get accepted. There were other amendments that we tried to get in, looking at energy efficiency targets for new construction and major renovation. So if you think about electrification, that's just reducing the amount of fossil fuels, but you're not actually talking about overall energy use reduction. There was a whole section referencing the Maryland High Performance Bill. This section, they added in zero energy to the definition of high performance. So if you're familiar with the state high performance bill, it's LEED Silver, Green Globes, or the Green Construction Code. So they added in zero energy, which was really cool, which means that all state buildings with state funding had to be zero energy. They exempted schools, except for that one in each district. All of that was struck out. we're really upset about this because in that same section for the last 3 years, we've been trying to clarify this funding of projects that are required to be under the Maryland High Performance Bill and clarify that to 25%. That was struck out again. And we're also trying to remove these confusing guidelines that were put in a couple years ago that basically exempt schools from this program. So that's also a little bit disappointing, but I don't think it will be the end of these things in legislation. And then I think it's back to you, Chris.
Okay, so I think as we had touched on that there was a big focus, there's also kind of a parallel climate equity now bill that that did not get through. But I think environmental justice is something that's really a significant focus, and that will be back again and again, I think, until we can really try to address some of these larger issues, because much of the industry, much of the transportation focus, much of the waste really does affect many of these communities that are, that are suffering from having those things located around those. So I think one of the pieces is the commission, of the Senate Bill 528 is that, the Commission on Environmental Justice, identifying overburdened communities and trying to understand what are strategies and goals for reducing measures in those communities. Some of it is, taking a look at the waste and methane gas, emissions and things like that. So I think that there are a number of components that that I think that this will that basically will be brought to daylight, I think, through some of these, commissions and trying to report out and identifying means to move forward and enabling these communities to get out from the burden and really serious health risks of some of those issues. Then the jobs, creation, I think, is certainly also an important component of this. And I think that's, something that we've seen across the country is, as we're looking at moving towards electrification, there's a significant amount of retraining that needs to happen. I think California has really successfully done that in some areas, particularly, I think, on growing a solar workforce, folks that are trained to work in both in residential and commercial installations. So I think that's one of the pieces is there's a transition employment and retraining work group that's really trying to take a look at how do we work on looking at creating positions and transferring folks, that have skills in specific energy sectors to low carbon energy sectors and strategies to focus on that. And then additionally, I think, and this is also kind of tying to some of the underserved communities, is the Chesapeake Conservation Corps is really focusing on building a youth employment as well that is also focused on environmental and energy and renewable energy components. So focused on building that workforce, and particularly in disaffected communities. Then I think that this ties back to some of the other energy investment. The Climate Catalytic Capital Fund is looking at technology development and financing to basically try to help develop a greater equity in terms of energy markets. And I think some of the funds from this will be focused on grant investment in infrastructure to help some of these communities. And then the Climate Transition and Clean Energy Hub is basically supposed to be an information clearinghouse, trying to gather information and share that. One of the things that I think was particularly frustrating in this last session is that the vast amount of disinformation that was spread to legislators and trying to identify sources of that, and then also trying to share kind of stronger truth and information in terms of making folks aware of these issues. So the more that we can identify some of these issues and communicate those to legislators in an intelligent way, I think that the better off we will be in trying to focus on our goals. Then transportation, I think, is yeah, these are basically kind of tied to the bus programs again. The one other piece I think that was a little bit unique was the extending the tax credit for the purchase of zero emission vehicles. And I think uniquely in the way this legislation was set, I think is probably developed to broaden the market. I think the funding or the cap of dollars spent for this is basically below a Tesla. So I think looking at trying to broaden the market for the Volts and other cars, none of that funding it's only for zero emissions vehicles. So it did not provide a tax credit for hybrid vehicles, but only the all electric vehicles. And electrification was something that became really a big component of some of the discussion. If you can't sleep at night and want to look back at some of the early hearings in the Senate, some of the utilities who have been part of the task force and understand that things are moving forward towards a lower carbon fuel sources, I think basically came to testify opposing this legislation. And Senator Pinsky, who chaired that committee, basically I think really called them out and said you're coming here saying you can't do it, not providing any solutions, not providing any timelines or means to get there. So I think that that there basically has been a focus, and I think that we all would like that to be faster, but the Public Service Commission, trying to identify regulations and a path forward to moving towards an all-electric distribution system and all-electric program for buildings kind of moving forward. It was just too expensive, not enough capacity, not now, but an unwillingness to really put forth ideas and how to move that ahead.
It was oh, go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say, at a subsequent MCEC event, their advisory board event, one of the executives of BGE got up and said, "We're looking forward to a clean energy future, and our engineers are working on it right now to figure out how many substations we need to build." So I think they see it coming. They're on board. It's just needing to be told to do it is kind of important.
Lisa, did you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to add to Chris's story. Yeah, if you want to get mad, you can watch some of the hearings. But Senator Pinsky, when he was talking about, where were you when we were writing the bill? We were open for suggestions. And he said, the people on the other side of the aisle, he was like, I know all of them by name, talking about all the environmentalists, because we had so many meetings and amendments and things we wanted to talk about on the climate partners agenda. So, and then Ben, I think you're up on these slides.
Sorry, double muted myself. It's great. So I was going through this and I started getting confused. Wait, who has to do what? Who has to, when? So I asked if we could do a who's who and what's the role, because there are so many agencies and various offshoot groups touched by this. So here you go. The Maryland Department of the Environment has the Climate Catalytic Action Fund, and Chris talked about that. Important note to that, I'm not sure Chris touched on, except briefly, 40% of this $5 million a year has to go to low-income households. So, that's an equity issue as much as anything about helping people transition off of fossil fuels. Establish energy performance standards of their programs. Maryland Commission on Climate Change sits under the MDE, and they got a whole lot of additional working groups to look at various things. You can read those. I'm not going to read them all to you. And my favorite is a composting study for utility scale composting. We moved here from Seattle 9 years ago, and we said they don't compost. Freak out for us. All right, next slide. The Maryland Energy Administration, the Climate Transition and Clean Energy Hub. I thought that was also tied to the Maryland Clean Energy Center. It turns out it's completely under the MEA. they're going to be developing some of the requirements and developing some of the plans around, what does a clean energy future look like? How do we get there? It should be a really neat one. It is worth saying that all of these, including the working groups on the previous slide, none of these people have been nominated yet. And so there's plenty of lobbying to be done. If you want to be on one of those groups, ping us after and we'll figure out who we can introduce to whom. There are required slots for architects, engineers, energy efficiency companies. You keep going. They actually list out who's going to be on that group. The Commission on Environmental Justice, Sustainable Communities has added scope. Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force. I want to be on that one because it really looks hard at what does it take to go to be an all-electric code. The Department of Labor has to adopt the 2018 IGCC. Right now, it's hard written in for the 2012. It's also hard written in for the 2018, which will be a problem as soon as we go to the 2021 codes. So that'll be something we're looking for in future years to just say most recent, just like the rest of the code cycles. They now have 18 months instead of 12 months to adopt new codes, and they're required to make recommendations for an all-electric building code. So those studies live a little in their group too. Like I said, the Maryland Clean Energy Center, the Climate Transition Clean Energy Hub is not there, as I got that clarification late last night. But they are going to add climate mitigation projects to their current scope of studying energy projects. Next slide, and the last one for me, I think. The Maryland Green Building Council has to examine environmental product declarations. This is your environmental impact and their use in the building environment and how they can adopt them into the green building program, and the testing protocols of low carbon concrete, performance-based concrete requirements, maximum cement content, because that's the main carbon impact. The Maryland Green Building Council is going to need some concrete experts if you know anybody. That's going to be something they need to put on their board next year. Interagency Commission has the 5 percentage points of state funding, coordination on the electric school bus program, the Public Service Commission, electric school bus program again, and investor-owned battery storage, which is neat. And a requirement to figure out how to upgrade the electric distribution system, including the planning studies across multiple companies. It should be really interesting. And then Chesapeake Conservation Corps, Chris did this last, the Youth Corps and climate mitigation projects to current scope. It's a lot there.
So there are a number of things that certainly did not get through, and things that we think certainly will be issues that we will want to look at and figure out how we can support. House Bill 39 conversion. There's a lot of public, private property looking to convert some of that to affordable housing. House Bill 43, this is the bird safe legislation. This, I think, is the 4th year for that being introduced, and basically making buildings safer and reducing bird collisions on buildings. This actually got through the House, through the Senate committee, and did not get heard on the Senate floor because I think certain legislators were going to take time on the floor to stall that. So it got the furthest that it's gone, but did not quite get there yet. And then the Environmental Justice Act is really looking at kind of broader issues of equity and environmental justice. There was House Bill 365 was looking at state-funded construction projects and prohibiting fossil fuels from being used on any state-funded projects. This did get a fair amount of debate, and certainly is building awareness and swinging the needles toward full electrification of buildings, but that again did not get through. The Futures Act was basically really a student-led group that's really focusing on moving our University of Maryland system to a zero carbon emissions program. Unfortunately, I think they've built some big infrastructure that is not renewable energy based, but I think that the students were very vocal and active members of the legislature, and they will definitely be back. This, I think, was our third year, maybe, for the trying to get the high performance building revisions implemented that we would like to see. Again, it was kind of tied into the climate action bill and then did not get cleared. And then another bill that I think is kind of looking at trying to make smarter use of infrastructure was the accessory dwelling unit. And this is basically, enabling, and in some cases maybe requiring, accessory dwellings to be offered for, purposes of affordable housing and increasing density and working on existing infrastructure. I believe the city of Minneapolis now does not allow single lot development, that the lot would have to have accessory dwellings as a component of that. So this is something I know is happening in other jurisdictions. So that's something that I think will also be something that we'll see in the future. So I think that's kind of wrapping up kind of our summary of what we've seen. We're certainly open for questions and would invite you all to connect with us and participate in future sessions.
I'd just like to say great work, team. That's a very impressive list of legislation. And although we didn't get everything, I think you did a really great job. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you.
So there's a sleeper line in those. I want to make sure people saw, particularly as architects, that in 2030, you're going to have buildings that use gas are 20% better than the average, than their peer group. What's sleeper in there is that by 2045, they will have to be gas free. So if we build a gas building that we're designing today, gets built in 2025, 20 years later, they're going to have to figure out how to replace that gas system. And in some cases, like boilers, that hasn't even made it through its equipment life yet. That should be 25 or 30 years. So there's something really to think about for those 35,000 square foot and larger buildings moving forward, even though we don't have an all electric code and aren't, at least in this cycle, we have a really good reason not to build gas buildings much more of the time than maybe what we do now as standard practice. Right.
Yeah.
And heat pump technology is working now. It's getting us there. That was a big thing we had to combat this year, that heat pumps don't work and whatnot. It's interesting.
If you need a really great resource on the myths of electrification, ask Ben.
I wrote one.
Right.
With Lori's proofreading.
Yeah. And I think that, there was a lot that happened because we had a lot more connection and collaboration across different partnerships. So I know I'd see Lori on the line here, Michael on the line, and I think connecting folks who are experts and willing to take time and really voice their thoughts and share their knowledge with us and with legislators. And the more that we're able to continue to do that, I think the better our work and better results we'll have coming out of the legislature. So thanks all for participating. It's really great to work with everyone that's been a part of this.
Lori, what did we miss?
No, that was fantastic. That was a great summary. Thank you.
Thank you.
We missed our recruitment. If you want to join us next year,
right.
Lisa and Chris and Peter Dew and I and Michael have largely been doing this, and we would welcome more people to this committee.
Right. Great.
Joe, I think, did you want to close it? You kind of got to talk about it a little bit, but you're talking about senators for next year and being it's the year to push because it'll be a favorable group. Did you have anything more you wanted to say on that? I think you might have had a plan for closing. If you're there, Joe, you might be muted.
You're muted, Joe. There you go. Gotcha.
Okay. No, I've been going over registrations and the candidate lists, and knowing who's going to go from the House to the Senate. And I'm enthused because we have a more progressive group of legislators, and not a full group. I mean, keep in mind, about just under 20% of the bills that are filed each year pass. And this is a significant bill that we got passed. I mean, absolutely significant bill, given the track record of most bills that aren't as controversial as this. So I'm seeing people that helped us get this through, and I'm seeing people who are moving up into leadership right now that help get this bill through. And that's what encourages me. And I'm seeing a crop of new legislators that, if they win, and I can't guarantee or guess any better than anybody else, but if they win and come to Annapolis, that they will, I feel, by hearing what they've had to say and where they've been, either in the county councils or whatever, that we will have a much more receptive ear in the legislature than we've had in the past.
Good.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Joe.
Any other questions we should open it up for, or we can call it a night and everybody go have dinner? All right. And of course, you can always reach out to us with questions in the future. My email and Zolna's email are on the AIA page under the Committee on the Environment. So you can reach us anytime, and we'll make sure you get to the right people to answer questions.
Hey, Ben, before we sign off,
Yeah.
I'll echo the sincere thanks for everything the three of you did. It's been remarkable to just see the amount of email traffic and that you guys are on top of this. And then you can keep track of all the numbers and the SBs and the HBs. I can't do it. So you guys are great. But also, you mentioned that there are these various working groups and committees and such. And there were some emails about this last week. Are there any in particular right now where people are sort of really needed and wanted? I would like to be targeted because, like all of us, I'm spread pretty thin right now, but is there a process other than just sort of this email thread that's been going around?
It's a good place to start. And what Michael's talking about is we worked in a much larger group than just AIA Maryland. The Climate Solution Partners. It's been an amazing partnership this year. And to Michael's point, it also turned into a part-time job for probably 25 people, myself and Chris and Lisa included. But we're now trying to figure out, at least whose names do we want to put forward for what committees? And there's definitely a few committees that we and working groups that we sure would like to have friendly folks on those committees, right? People who are like-minded and again, they're prescribed roles. It's people, like an engineer, an architect, energy efficiency company, a representative from the energy producer, and keep going. But the big ones for me are the one that's going to come up with future solutions to look at building electrification. That's one that's super clear. The equity working group kind of feels important. And then there was one other working group that was going to be under the Maryland Climate Commission on Climate Change. Chris, do you remember there was a third one that I said, oh yeah, that's gotta make it.
Yeah, and Michael, we'll identify those specific groups and pathways to get names in there, and I'll reach out to you to because I will never turn down a volunteer. But yeah, I think that there are at least 3 work groups that we want to make sure that we get a kind of a knowledgeable focal architect on those groups, and we'll reach out and we'll do a follow-up communication on that.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
Any other questions? All righty, everybody, thank you for joining us. Sorry about the tech delay at the beginning, and have a wonderful evening.
All right, thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Everyone.